Hey, thanks for joining. My name is Peter Clark, and if you're watching this, you're interested in learning about how to improve your skills in interviewing and how to conduct an interview. So I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this and learn a little bit more about how to conduct an interview. So if you're a hiring manager or if you are in charge of a team and you're looking to add to your team, this would be a great training for you. So let's get started here. Well, really quickly, here's the agenda. The purpose of training, we'll talk about interview principles, your basic interview do's and don'ts, the basic interview format I recommend, some example interview questions, and how to appropriately follow up with a candidate. So the purpose of this training is, again, to allow you to improve your skills in how to do an interview. So even if you're an experienced interviewer, this can still be helpful for you. Also, I do focus a little bit on how to do a sales interview or how to hire salespeople, specifically direct salespeople. But this training is really applicable for anyone who wants to improve their skills on interviewing a candidate. Well, we'll first go over some basic interview principles. These will be the principles and ideas that should guide you in building out your interview process and how to conduct an interview. All right, so first up is be prepared. Always be prepared for your interview. You expect the candidate to be prepared, so make sure that you're prepared. You're on time, you're ready to go, you're professional, and the space is ready for the interview. You're going to want to start strong. So when you first meet the candidate, make sure that they have a good impression of you, the industry, and the company that you're with. You're going to want to understand the basic STAR format, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. That is a good way for you to expect a candidate to respond to a question. Even if they're not trained or they don't know how to give an answer in the STAR format, it's good for you to know so you can kind of best understand the way that a candidate should be responding to your questions. When you do an interview or talk to a candidate, you always want to make sure you provide the basic company background and job details so they fully understand what they're joining. You're going to want to learn about the candidate's goals. They're interviewing you as much as you are them. You're going to want to make sure you only ask job-specific questions. You don't want to go off on tangents or ask things that aren't important. There's not a lot of time for it, and it's also not best practices. When you ask your questions, you're going to ask a lot of open-ended questions, behavioral-based questions. So you should be ready to ask follow-up questions to try to seek more information to make sure you get a full assessment of the candidate. You want to make sure that you take notes during the interview. This will allow you to remember the conversations that you've had, keep the candidates organized. It also shows that you're actively listening. You want to make sure that you allow enough time for candidates to ask questions, and you want to leave the door open for them to follow up with questions if they think of some later. And at the end of the interview, you want to make sure you outline specific concrete next steps so the candidate understands if they get the job or they don't get the job, when they're going to hear back, and what the next steps will be. Okay, so here's the STAR interview format. Most people have heard of this. If you haven't, no worries. It basically stands for situation, task, action, and result. So when someone's asked a behavioral-based or open-ended type question in an interview, usually they want to respond in this format. So if you were to ask a question of a candidate, a behavioral-based question, the candidate should explain to you the situation that they were in that relates to that question, the task that they were assigned, and the action they took to accomplish the task, and then the ultimate results. So this is a really important format for you to understand. Again, most candidates, especially entry-level candidates, might not be aware of this, but this is the best way to respond to most questions. Okay, so let's quickly go over the basic do's and don'ts of the interview process. So let's cover some of the interview do's. Start on time. You expect the candidate to be on time, so you want to make sure that you start on time. You're going to want to make sure you review the interview schedule in advance. Make sure you know who's interviewing when, both the day of and the week of. You want to make sure that you conduct it in a prepared and organized area of the office. So the first thing a candidate usually sees is the reception area. Make sure that that's clean, professional, well organized. And then you're going to bring the candidate into a interview room or a conference room or your office. Make sure that you have that office prepared and ready to go. And for example, don't leave food laying out on the table. Make sure that it's a prepared area. You want to make sure you listen, specifically active listen, from when the candidate comes into the office, from when you say hello to when you walk them out. Make sure that you're actively listening the entire time. Again, you're going to want to focus on behavioral-based questions. A lot of yes and no questions aren't super helpful, so really focus a lot of your time on these behavioral-based questions. We'll go over some examples at the end. Once you've done the interview and you're kind of getting towards the end and you've assessed whether this person may or may not be a good fit, you want to start selling the organization. If they're a good fit for you and you want them to join your team, you want to kind of explain to them why. Again, they're interviewing you as much as you are them. So if you think they're going to be a good fit, talk to them about the benefits of joining the company, the role, and specifically what you as manager are going to help, how you're going to help them accomplish their goals. All right, so let's cover some basic don'ts. So don't ask dangerous questions. We all know what these are: age, race, religion, etc. Avoid all dangerous related questions. Some things might come up in conversation, but you really don't want to focus on or spend too much time on anything that would be considered a dangerous question. Keep it professional and keep it focused. You don't want to come to the halo effect. This means that you might have a top skill set that you're looking for, and the person might have that top skill set, but they don't have any other skills or attributes that you want for a person in this role. So just because they have the one thing doesn't mean they're a perfect fit. So really look holistically at the individual and the candidate and make sure that they have most of the attributes and skills that you're looking for. Don't be impatient. Be really patient with candidates, especially entry-level candidates. You might be the first interview that they're doing if you're hiring an entry-level salesperson or another entry-level role. So be patient throughout the entire process. Don't emphasize on culture fit. I've talked to so many managers over my career, and after the interview, they say, they're not a good fit. Well, what does that mean? Right? So you don't focus too much on culture fit. People adapt. If you provide the environment and supportive environment that the candidate is looking for, you're going to help them accomplish their goals. And you think they have some of the skills to do the job successfully. Then if you provide if you're a good manager, you're going to make them successful. Don't do multiple checks. Too many checks and on the candidates and the process. If there's too much involved and the process is too cumbersome, that's not going to be helpful. It'll get bogged down. The candidate won't know what's going on. And don't involve too many people or colleagues in the process, especially as if an entry-level person. 12 people don't need to interview an entry-level person. That's unnecessary. So keep the entire process in interview well organized, succinct, and keep it simple. All right, let's talk about the basic interview format. So most interviews are going to be anywhere between 30 and 60 minutes. Entry level is going to be about 30 to 40 minutes or so, certainly not more than an hour. So here's what I recommend. You have your basic introduction. This is where you're going to introduce yourself, the company, and the role. You're going to have 10 or so minutes to ask some of your questions. You want to leave a decent amount of time for the candidate to ask some of their questions. Again, if you get to the point where you really think this person might be a good fit, you're going to want to sell the role. You know, how is this role, company, and you as a manager, how are you going to help this candidate accomplish the goals that they've talked about during the interview? A few minutes at the end for a conversation, and then you can extend offers same day or next day, especially if it's an entry-level sales role. And ultimately, whether you make an offer or don't, make sure the candidate understands how you're going to follow up with them and when. Let's go over some simple interview questions that you might want to cover. Here are some opening questions. So what is your interpretation of success? You might want to ask the candidate, describe an ideal work environment or the perfect job. What 3 things are most important to you in this position? After learning about this opportunity, what made you take the next steps and apply for the role? What are your short and long-term goals? What podcasts or books do you read? Describe a difficult time you've had, have had dealing with an employer or customer. Why was it difficult? How did you handle it? What was the outcome? Now, again, if you're hiring an entry-level person, they might not have a tremendous amount of work experience, but what they can draw on is some athletic experience they have, if they've done sports, if they were part of a club in school, or even any of their high school or college experience. They'll encounter some things that will allow them to answer these questions. All right, so let's go to focus questions. Again, a lot of these focus questions are based for salespeople, but you get the idea. These are open-ended general questions that will allow a candidate to really express themselves. So this question is, have you ever had a losing streak? How did you turn it around? So when you're asking a question, especially one like this, that's open-ended, behavioral-based, or something similar, you want to assess, why is this question important? Why am I asking it? And then you want to identify, what am I looking for in a response? For this one, the question is important. This question uncovers highly motivated candidates who are driven to succeed and have a process for bouncing back from failure. And then what are you looking for? Well, everyone has a bad spell, so beware of someone who claims they've never experienced a downturn. There's nothing wrong with a temporary slump, provided that the candidate learned from it. All right, so here's another focus question. How would you exceed and expectations in this role. If you started a company tomorrow, what would it be? Teach me something, right? Anything. All right. So thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate the time that you took to listen to me and review some skills on how to do an interview, specifically focused on salespeople. Again, you're going to want to make sure you follow up with the candidate so they understand what the next steps are, whether they do or don't get the job, and then make sure you keep those promises. All right. Good luck building your team, and reach out if you need any help.